Hey everyone, I'm your host Anthony. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching. This comes out to about 1 in 8 women, so this is a heavy topic. When many people hear they can't have kids, it can be pretty saddening. So, in your experience, what are some of the most common root issues you see with women and men when it comes to this issue?
Well, I just think it speaks to the whole global epidemic of everything that we see, right? With diabetes on the increase, metabolic syndrome problems on the increase, cancer on the increase. So people are just becoming less healthy overall. And I think women's and men's fertility just gets swept up in that. And this goes back to like early 1990s, 1992, when I was first studying this stuff. And my first teacher was a man named Dr. John R. Lee, who wrote a really famous book back in those days called What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Progesterone. And in the 90s, they were sounding the alarm bells about reproductive problems with fish, with frogs. And humans were starting to get caught up in the mix, But that was 30 years ago. And again, 30 years ago, there were whole categories of fish that were no longer viable. They couldn't reproduce anymore. And so it turns out that our hormonal systems for all animals, this is not just humans, right? All animals, their reproductive systems are very sensitive to environmental toxins, to changes that we are sort of invoking upon this planet. And I think we're just seeing, the long-term effects of that starting to get noticed now.
So true. I absolutely resonate with that. This has been going on for years and years and years. Just as our grandparents do not have issues now with eating certain foods, it's now becoming a problem as it has for a while. So absolutely so true. I mean, how do you identify some of these other root issues though, aside from doing maybe an intake with your patients or helping out with practitioners?
Yeah, I mean, there's some big picture issues, right? Like one is like just chronic malnutrition. If the person's had a poor diet for their whole life, they just don't have the vitamins, minerals they need, fatty acids that they need to make all the hormones and to make the hormones work. And then there's digestive problems, we often see, almost always see accompanying female hormone issues. So infections in the gut, leaky gut, damage to the gut lining, damage to the immune system in the gut, those kinds of problems usually are going to lead to hormone imbalance. Um, Heavy metals, chemicals, and now this is another thing, uh, thinking about hormone production, what regulates the amount of hormones circulating in the body is how they're cleared, right? So it's not just that sometimes you can't make enough hormones or don't make hormones at the right times, but then the liver's ability to clear hormones can get disturbed, which means that has the same net effect as making the wrong amount of hormone, if you're not clearing the right amount of the hormone, because what ends up circulating in your bloodstream is not right either way. And so you can have liver toxicity issues that can lead to these kinds of problems as well. And then I guess you could overlay on top of that intense emotional stress, kind of economic and political instability that's sweeping through the world. I mean, people are just kind of worried now. And, maybe they don't feel as sexy or as sexual or have sex as often or, just not as sexually vibrant when we're, for men and women both, right? When we're under that kind of intense stress, because the stress hormones shoot up. And when the human body, prioritizes survival over reproduction, right? So when stress hormones surge and catecholamines surge and the thyroid gets a little wonked out, then, the sex hormones often take a hit in response to that.
So very true. And you brought up some really good points there. If you can, Dr. Kalish, can you really dive into the different links between fertility and the reproductive hormones and then some of these other organ systems like the thyroid and the gut systems? Because I really don't think many people realize how everything is truly connected in the body and how a lot of these root issues are impacting each other.
Yeah, you know what? I've been telling patients this for 30 years, which is that I've never had a case where the ovaries spontaneously malfunctioned in complete isolation from the rest of the body. I'm sure that's possible. I've just never seen it. I've never heard of it either in any of the cases that I've seen in the training programs. I teach doctors every week. We have 5 hours of class a week. We have hundreds of cases a week that I review. And so you think I would have seen it by now if it was a common problem. In other words, the ovaries are responding they're a response team. And so I think about it like if you were an alien looking down on this planet and you saw these fires breaking out in cities periodically, And then you always would see these red trucks there. You'd be like, these guys driving around in red trucks setting fires. No, that's the fire department, right? They're trying to put the fire out. So we don't want to blame the response team here for what's going on. And what's often going on is some kind of internal fire, right? Some kind of internal inflammatory process in the body that's generating this. And so if it's inflammation in the gut, if it's inflammation in the liver, if it's inflammation because you're stressed, if it's inflammation because you're eating inflammatory foods, whatever that source is, right, then all the hormones sort of jump on. So the thyroid hormone conversion gets thrown off from that inflammation. The ability to make cortisol and DHEA in the adrenal glands gets dysregulated. The brain's not doing so well, telling the adrenal glands what to do. And then somewhere in the midst of all that, dopamine gets thrown off, brain chemicals, catecholamines start to surge, epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, all that stuff is surging. And then somewhere in the middle of all that stuff, progesterone and estrogen start to falter. But it's always contextual, right? It's always in response to this, what should be a hormone symphony of coordinated, beautiful things happening, just gets, a wrench in it and things start to get thrown off.
Absolutely. And you talked a lot about inflammation and some of these other things that can brew in the body, then leading to these conditions or diagnoses that people are often labeled with, right? And so when we separate the body systems like that, it can be very difficult then to, without identifying the root issues, those people are then, stuck with being on a specific medication or something further and further, getting away from the root issue. So it sounds like it's kind of safe to say that a lot of these root issues can be, and infertility in particular, can be mixed in and mistaken for conditions like PCOS or endometriosis, or even other symptoms like heavy menstrual cycles or irregular menstrual cycles. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think that most women that have fertility problems, if you get their history done well enough, have had hormone problems 5, 10, 15 years prior. If you can go back enough, to your point, like, oh yeah, when I was 18, I was diagnosed with PCOS, or when I was 15, I got put on birth control because I was having migraine headaches related to my menstrual cycle. So again, it's rare that the fertility problem is the first sign that there is an imbalance in the hormones. It's usually just the one that is bad enough that they want to go see a bunch of doctors for it because, it's a pretty serious issue.
Okay, yeah, I mean that makes sense. There's a lot of people suffering clearly from infertility if it's 1 in 8 women. So, what about women who have been diagnosed with conditions like uterine or fallopian tube issues? How do you differentiate those problems from some of these other root issues?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that there are these month-long female hormone labs that are available, right? And so you can just do these month-long panels and see if it's a timing problem or production problem or ovulation timing problem with the hormones or not. And those are rarely done in fertility cases. And so most of the time, doctors are immediately looking for more complex potential problems, or they'll give this diagnosis that the woman's having anovulatory cycles, or she's sort of not ovulating at all, right? Like she's infertile because she's not ovulating. And then you'll run the month-long lab. I've seen this hundreds of times. Then you run the month-long lab and you're like, oh, well, yeah, you're ovulating, but it's on day 7. It's a little early. So they didn't see it, or we just had one in class last week. She was ovulating like on day 23 or something. So like a week late, right? 8 days late. And so it's very rare to see women that don't ovulate. Usually when they're diagnosed with some kind of more dramatic condition, like they're not ovulating, it's because the timing of the cycle is off. And you can capture that if you do a simple test. And again, I'm sure there are people that exist that really do have these more serious medical issues, but the vast majority of women that have a fertility problem, you can see it on these month-long tests, and you can see the underlying causes for it on the other functional medicine tests that we do quite clearly.